Hey, Dave. Sorry, I'm just scrolling down. I'm just seeing people.
Morning.
Morning. Hi, Julia and Chris.
Hey
Morning.
guys.
Thank
Well,
you for making time before your travels.
absolutely. Nothing better on a Friday morning than ventilation talk.
It's a great way to kick off some time.
That's
Hey,
right.
there's Kenny. How you doing, Kenny?
Hey, good morning. Doing good. How are you, Scott?
I'm doing excellent. Is Robert joining us?
You should be. Let me fix him.
Perfect. Oh, I think I see Rob there. Morning, Rob. Tim, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing excellent.
Good morning. I was just trying to
What's
find my
good in South
headphones.
Jersey these days?
That's a good question. Find out, let me know.
Gosh, the whole country's looking at that governor race you have going on.
Yeah.
Be interesting.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, it slowed a little bit. Scott, do you want to get rolling here and I can keep an eye
Yeah,
on?
I don't see. Do you see Caleb? Oh, there's Caleb.
Yep. Okay.
Hey, buddy.
How you doing?
Good man. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll take all right on a Friday.
Yeah, I'm still getting used to this weather.
Seth, I think we're good. We got all the companies represented.
Awesome. Well, good deal. Thanks so much for making the time with us on this Friday morning. Um, Looking forward to spending some additional time together and hopefully just bringing some additional value for you folks. If you would, just a couple housekeeping items. So we will be recording this, so we'll share the recording once complete. So happy to follow up with that. If we could, let's go ahead and if you could mute yourselves just so we can avoid background noise that may pop up during the course of the conversation. But we will have it's sort of broken into sections, so we'll have opportunities for you to unmute and ask questions. If you wanted to ask a question in real time, you can put it in the chat and we'll either address it then or answer it a little bit later. But Other than that, we plan for this to go a couple hours or so. We'll have a break about halfway through, roughly halfway through too. So that'll be the plan for this morning. But this is our home ventilation certification. So here at Isaiah Industries, we manufacture a good amount of ventilation products, mainly Ridge Vent, and also distribute some other solutions. So we self-proclaimed that we could offer a certification for the contractor partners we work with across the country, hopefully providing some good education. And then also just another feather in your cap of showing potential customers that you've gone to greater lengths than your competition to be more educated and more equipped to help them identify and solve their problems. So that's our goal here for this morning. We'll wrap up with a little quiz at the end, just up in the legitimacy just a little bit. But so far, we have 100% pass rate on the quiz, so we're going to be good. But then we'll follow up with some certificates. But quick, for those of you who may be a little bit less familiar with Isaiah Industries, we're a family of brands based out of Piqua, Ohio, just north of Dayton, Ohio. Family of brands focusing primarily on beautiful metal shingle products that look like traditional slate, shake, and tile. We have some premium standing seam options as well. And then one of our additional brands is Roof AquaGuard underlayments. So again, premium underlayments engineered for use underneath metal roofing, and some unique products there, entangled mesh, breathable options. We're a distributor of a Class A fire rated underlayment now as well. So trying to offer and make available some unique solutions that are value add to you and your customers, and increase the performance of our roof systems overall. But so we have these family of brands. It's all one team here out of Ohio. Scott represents for your area all of those products, and for 45 years have been taking these products to market, striving to have as close a relationship with companies like yours as we can. So that way we're not just crunching up pieces of metal and shipping them around the country, but striving to have that relationship. So hopefully we can come alongside and provide some additional value, like this training, other lead generation programs, sales resources and tools, obviously technical support and training as well. So regardless of where you stand in your relationship with us, please know we're always here to help any way we can. And Scott, myself, the rest of our team, we want to know what those ways are that we can be of help. This is this certification is part of our effort to that end, like I said, of providing some additional value. Was really birthed out of requests from customers over the years wanting a greater in-depth understanding of home ventilation and some of the correlating aspects in building science there. And really, first and foremost, the reason that they wanted this training and wanted this level of in-depth knowledge was being around the block a few times ourselves and our customers. We understand that if there's an issue with ventilation, we are going to be the ones blamed first for that house. That homeowners have this perception that everything, the ceiling and above, is the roofer's problem. And so if there's something going on in that attic, whether it's ventilation, insulation, plumbing, whatever related, that if there's something that manifests, we're going to be called in and potentially even blamed for that. So wanting to increase our knowledge base to identify those potential problems and help the homeowners solve them rather than being blamed ourselves for them on down the road. And through that process, just really being able to having this knowledge and then incorporating this knowledge into our sales process, use it to further establish your expertise and your care for that homeowner. Taking the extra time to talk about the science behind how their whole roof assembly, ventilation, insulation, all of these things need to work together, why it's important for the homeowners, and identify potential problems that you can then solve for them. So if we can go into the house looking, sounding, acting different than all of our competition and show that we care more about them and their unique situation, that's obviously going to pay dividends for us, build a whole lot of rapport, and set us up well for success. From a sales process standpoint, we believe that all of this content and this process is really a huge opportunity, though, for us to uncover problems they didn't know they had, which then in the sales process creates a new level of urgency and emotion around this roofing decision and all things associated with it. So we find day in and day out when we're working with homeowners, and know that you do as well, that when you show up to the house, they have this perception that because they've stood in the front lawn, they've stood in their front lawn and looked at their roof, that they know everything they need to know about the roof, and they only need a quote from you, a bid from you on what they're asking for. We all know that is usually not at all the case. There are things going on in the attic. There are dynamics and considerations that they aren't accounting for. And so if we have this knowledge, if we have this process, and we can uncover new problems and considerations for them, they're going to quickly understand that, oh, I don't know everything I need to know about my roof. And I need Caleb or John, Tim, the rest of you to really come alongside and help me understand help me know what I don't know and help prescribe solutions for that. And again, if we can create that dynamic, We're separating ourselves from the rest of the competitors that showed up and did just give them that bid standing in the front lawn, and we're positioning ourselves as that trusted expert that they can rely on. And from there, if we find these problems, if we prescribe solutions, we're obviously building a whole lot more value in working for us, value that's untapped by everyone else showing up at the house. And if we build more value, we can command a higher margin. We're only looking to get the margin we need to be successful and have a successful business that's around long term. But we can only build that. Sup, Ryan? We can only build that by commanding more value, and that all starts with solving these problems and delivering a higher level of solution, higher level of education to homeowners than they're receiving from anybody else. So that's the why behind we developed this and have been out promoting it and offering it, and I'm sure consistent with why you thought it was worth your time showing up bright and early on a Friday and being here today. So that's the why and really what all we're trying to accomplish as we move forward together today. Once we do wrap up and pass that quiz, like I said, we will get you all outfitted with a certificate here. Just another small little token that you can use to increase your level of credibility and value you can then build for your customers. So as we get rolling here, Scott's going to then here take over. We're going to talk about the why ventilation is important. We know we need to bring air in at the eaves and exhaust it out somehow at the ridge, but why exactly we're doing that, what all we're trying to prevent and accomplish, and then once we have that foundation, we'll then come back and start talking about how much ventilation we need, how we're going to get that ventilation requirement, and then also unique situations that we run into where it becomes more difficult to get that ventilation and prevent those problems. So how we handle those as well. But I'll turn it over here to Scott and we'll keep rolling.
Thanks, Seth. Guys, just a little bit of housekeeping there. Also, I hope you printed up your workbook that I sent out to you so you're taking notes as we go along. And that quiz that's at the end of that workbook, that's something that you'll send in. We won't be taking that, here, hey, put down your pencils when you're done, kind of thing. Just send it over to me over the weekend or whenever you get a chance and we'll grade it for you. Let me share my screen and we'll get going here. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. I need to lose this. I have this box up top. Okay, there it is. All right. Well, let's talk about, as Seth said, let's talk about why ventilation is important. He already said that it's a system of intake and exhaust that creates a continuous airflow through the attic space. What you want to do is you want to bring obviously the fresh air in and expelling the hot, stanky air out of your attic. And this process is going to regulate the attic's temperature and the humidity, which will obviously improve the energy efficiency for your homeowner. It prevents any kind of moisture buildup. It extends the roof's lifespan, all those things that making the home comfortable throughout the year. Again, proper ventilation relies on intake in a lower place on the roof and then exhaust up higher, right? Because naturally hot air rises. All right. Here's a key fact, and I'm stealing my own thunder because I'm going to say this later on as well, but it's on your quiz, so you might as well learn it. The average family of four creates 2.5 gallons of moisture every single day. Now, if you got teenagers who take longer showers, that might be 3 gallons. All right. But they're creating a lot of moisture. Why? Because it's the dishes we wash, it's the food we cook, it's the showers we take, it's the clothes, all that stuff is creating. And because doors have better seals on them, windows are insulated, all those things, it's driving that hot air, that moisture up into the attic. So what we're talking about today has become so much more important than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago because houses breathed better back then. But now we're tightening them up. And as a result, this is becoming an issue. So let's all right. So let's look at this slide. This is a good slide. Again, all this stuff will be available to you guys. Adequate ventilation is critical for protecting against two major things, heat and moisture. When you don't have it in the summertime, the heat of the sun pounds down on that roof, heating up, and you guys have all been in attics where it's been blasting hot in the summertime, right? So you got that heat buildup and that warm air is not getting expelled without proper ventilation. And then two, another danger is that warm, moist air that's inside the living space, that's getting driven up, remember, and it gets trapped then into this dark attic space, and that can cause real problems. So you're going to hear this term a lot today. It's called this proper ventilation creates this river of air. You're going to get tired of me saying this. It's a river of air that's being created, proper ventilation, which exhausts the heat and the moisture. And without it, it can cause some real problems. Like what? You guys have seen this. This roof is baked. Why? Right? Because there's improper ventilation ultimately that has dried out all the oil in those asphalt shingles, and it's just literally shortened the roof's life and it's baked it. All right. Here's a good thing to remember. It's a quick equation. Less oil equals shorter life. Less oil equals shorter life. So when you are already starting off with an asphalt shingle that maybe only has 15, 20, 25, maybe 30% oil, and then you're baking it, after 10, maybe 15 years, that stuff is cooked. It's done, right? And so that's an issue with ventilation. It can shorten the life of roofing, well, at least asphalt. Another problem is energy bills, all right? Let's face it, we're all facing problems with energy bills, right? No one likes to pay their energy bills. And the reason ventilation is important with energy bills is because that warm, moist air that's inside the living space that's getting driven up into the attic. And if it doesn't have any place to go, that moisture is going to go somewhere and it's going to go into that insulation. All right. And wet insulation is not a good insulator. And it's going to allow, it's not going to keep the cool air down in the living space or the hot during the winter. All right. I just turned on my heat the other day and I'm glad my ventilation, my insulation is working. Another issue is ice damming. All right. So we'll be doing a deeper dive into this in a little bit. And if you're no one's in the Florida market on this call, but if you were, you can take a coffee break. All right. Because you don't deal with this. This is my New Hampshire people. You guys are dealing with this, maybe in Ohio sometimes, but not probably to this extent. We'll go into a deeper dive about what the reasons for ice damming, and it's really as a result of ventilation. Another issue, another danger that we have to look at, everyone has seen this who's been inside attics. Poor ventilation encourages organic growth. And here's a key point, and I want you guys to hear this. You may never know how well or poorly the homeowner's ventilation is working without a proper attic inspection. Now, let me say that again. You will never really know how well or how poorly a ventilation system is working without doing a proper attic inspection. I rarely ask contractors, ones that I'm just meeting for the first time, do you guys perform an attic inspection as part of your sales process? And usually everyone, 90% of the people say yes. And then I ask a follow-up question. So what tools do you typically use? And there's usually silence. And then it's usually followed by a flashlight. Get a flashlight, look around up there. And that's a good tool. It's a great tool to use. And it's a necessary tool to use. But there's other tools that are also as critical to use to be able to evaluate how a ventilation system is working for the homeowner. And without those tools present, it would be kind of like if Ryan just had a new guy show up to install roofs and you only had a drill, you know? That was just one tool. Well, that's a good tool. To install metal, it's a great tool, but it's not the only tool, right? He needs more tools. And so the same thing, you're going to need a good set of tools to do a proper attic inspection. All right, so let's dig into these dangers a little bit more. We'll get a little kind of dig into it, and you can take some notes just to make sure you're really familiar with what's happening. Again, all of this can be prevented. All of these dangers can be prevented by creating these rivers of air, all right, flowing up from the soffit and out the ridge vent or off ridge vent. All right, that's what we want to be creating. Because if we're not doing that, the dangers, again, the dangers of heat, without proper ventilation, these homeowners are going to be feeling the pinch of increasing energy bills. And if you can offer, as Seth said, if you can offer a solution to help alleviate that pain, they're going to lean in and pay closer attention. All right, so here it is. More and more customers are feeling this, right? With this increasing energy bills, and without solving their ventilation issues, the first danger of heat is going to result in that stagnant air that's being captured up in that attic space. And you know that it's just going to make that air conditioner work harder over the summer months. Now we're out of the summer now, but over the summer, if you're trying to keep your house around 70, 71 degrees, it's just going to work harder if that cool air is not getting held into the living space because of your insulation is poor, your ventilation is poor. So as a result, your energy bills are going to be increasing. All right. There's an interesting study that was done by a psychologist who studies consumer spending, Dr. Cialdini. He revealed that motivations are not weighted equally in buying decisions. All right, so he looked at homeowners and how they make decisions, and he said this, that consumers are twice as motivated by pain of loss than pleasure of gain. All right, and he used insulation as an example, and this was super interesting. He said, by not insulating, you will lose $1 a day. That became more powerful for homeowners than by saying, in a consumer's mind, by insulating, you'll save $1 a day. So that power of loss, if you can communicate to your homeowner by not having proper insulation, you're going to lose something, that is twice as more powerful than by saying, if you insulate properly, you're going to gain something. Now, this was a study that was done. We didn't come up with this. We just read the study. But I think it's powerful to understand that in buying decisions which are rooted in emotion, decisions made by customers are either looking to gain pleasure or avoid pain. That avoiding pain is more powerful than gaining pleasure. All right, so just something to keep thinking about around this, why ventilation and solving for ventilation is so important. All right. With proper ventilation, though, the other dangers that we're going to be looking at are the dangers of heat. All right. So dangers of heat, remember that heat is not getting trapped into that living space. It's getting pushed up into that attic. And without that, because if you don't have insulation that's working, it's not going to trap that heat inside that living space. So wet insulation will not hold heat as well. Wet insulation will not hold heat as well as dry insulation. You know that because if you had a wet coat, a wet down coat, and you wore it out in the winter, it's not going to work as well as a dry one. All right. So you want that effective airflow to be working to keep that insulation dry. The other danger we have to look at with heat is going to be this, is ice damming. And I think that this slide is worth the price of admission. Now, I know admission was free, but if we charged for it, it would have been worth it. because you could use this slide during a presentation and it makes complete sense. All right, let me walk you through it real quick. All right, heat rises out of the living space, right? Heat rises and it hits the snow. Snow falls, heat rise, you turn on the heat. The heat, because the insulation is not working well, it's driven up into this attic space and then it heats up this lower part of the deck, right? Unevenly. Water forms, water flows down, and then it hits a space on the roof that's unheated, right? So then it cools down again, it creates ice. That ice builds up and it pushes the water back up the roof slope. And then here's the issue. As it's pushing it back up, it's going to begin to penetrate into the living space. And that's the dangers with ice damming. All right. And so just helping your homeowner understand ice damming wasn't the result of an issue with the roof. It was actually an issue with there wasn't a rivers of air that are causing this. If this heat is coming up, it should have been flowing back out the ridge. Instead, it was getting trapped and allowing it to unevenly heat the underside of the deck, which caused the issues. All right. So that's the real issue with ice damming. It's not the issue of the roof. It's the issue of the ventilation. Let me pause. Any questions there? Is that all straightforward? I love this slide. I think this is a great slide. All right. Now here's some. Sometimes you can't, even if you're doing everything you can well with educating the homeowner and doing everything you can, sometimes there's going to be the geometry of the roof that'll be working against you, and that ice dams or things like that will be inevitable. So heating cables, some people use heating mats. In this situation, if I was working with you, I'd probably suggest using snow guards on the opposing gables and maybe upslope here, just to avoid snow getting caught in this area and then eventually causing ice and all that kind of stuff. So there's some stuff that will be working against you. So this, be mindful when you're looking at a roof and you're quoting a job, what's really going on? What could be the worst case scenarios there? All right. So those are the dangers of heat. Let's look at the dangers of moisture. All right. Now, when we're thinking about moisture, we said that an average family of four is creating a lot of moisture every single day, right? Every single day they're creating moisture, and this moisture has to go somewhere. All right. And it wasn't much of a problem decades ago, but because things have gotten tighter and we've gotten better building science, now we have to deal with it a whole lot more. All right. So what we want to do is we have to consider the ventilation to make sure that the insulation is staying dry as that moisture is getting driven up, because it will begin to compromise a homeowner's R value. All right. So you can see here on this picture, moisture is getting created, it's getting driven up, and then underneath there, it can start to saturate that insulation. We'll talk about what happens with wet insulation in just a little bit. Okay. So let's talk about condensation though, because this is a cool topic that Todd, our company president, taught me a lot about, and I think it's pretty interesting. Condensation growth happens. Mold will happen when the condensation will hit the backside of the deck, and because it's in a dark space, and if it just stays there and the rivers of air is not causing it to dry out, it's a perfect place for mold to grow. But it's helpful to understand what is actually causing the condensation. Condensation happens when warm, moist air hits a cool surface. So we have this illustration of a glass of lemonade, which looks actually fantastic. if you're out on your summer, if this was the summer and this Friday night, you went out on your deck with a nice cool glass of lemonade, you'd notice that eventually there'd be some water droplets happening on the outside of that glass. Now, you guys might be smarter than I am, but I never knew why. I never, I know that it's not the water inside the glass, but why is water forming outside of it? Well, it's because as warm, moist air can hold more water than cool air does, right? And so as that warm, moist air hits that cool surface, it loses its energy and then it releases its water onto that glass. All right. So it's the same principle that happens in ventilation when that warm, moist air is getting driven up from that living space and it hits the underside of that deck, it cools and it creates moisture, condensation. And that has to get evacuated out of that space, out of that attic space, or you're going to have to deal with some organic growth. So here's a principle. Warm always drives to cold. All right. Warm will always drive to cold. All right. Any questions about that? All right. So as we think about this, we're going to keep thinking about creating these rivers of air. All right. We want to create these rivers of air, all right, good flows of air that's going up from the soffit and out the vent, because if we don't, we're going to have issues with our insulation and the potential of organic growth happening on the deck. All right, so something to be mindful of, though, is when you're installing a roof over top, you're doing a tear off and it was a previously maybe a cedar shake roof, and now you're installing a new metal roof and you're redecking it. Well, before that attic in that house vented really easily, because these over time they separate a little bit, and it just breathes a lot better than something that's going to be on a deck that's going to be a solid decking. And so you have to account for the change in ventilation, right? We had a contractor who did something like this and didn't account for the change in ventilation, right? And so something to be mindful of when you're tearing off, especially a cedar shake roof or maybe a slate roof. How is this going to affect now the ventilation? How is that warm, moist air that's always being created inside that living space? How are you accommodating for that ventilation? Because it might not have been a problem with the cedar shake roof, but now when you're re-roofing it with another product, it might become a problem. So you just have to be mindful of that. Okay. So let's do a quick review here. Some key takeaways just to remember. Ventilation always protects against the dangers of heat and moisture. So we want to think of those two things, the dangers of heat and the dangers of moisture. Why? Because poor ventilation will, one, it'll shorten the roof life. Two, it'll increase the energy bills. Three, it can cause ice damming. And four, it can promote organic growth. All right, so that's the issues with heat and moisture. And then just remember, an average family of four creates 2.5 gallons of moisture every day. If you say that during the sales presentation, they're going to think, "Oh my gosh, this guy's so smart. He knows everything," right? Most people wouldn't know that. All right. And then condensation occurs when warm, moist air, because warm, moist air has more energy than cold air. So when warm, moist air and it's holding on to that moisture, it hits a cold surface, it cools down very quickly, it loses the energy to hold that moisture, and then it releases it into droplets. All right. And so those are the keys on this first section. All right. Any questions about that? All right. Well, guys, well done. We are ready for our first break. I'm going to hit the timer now. You got 5 minutes. All right. We all back? All right, let's go over. We were talking about this ventilation system. Let's go over how we can properly evaluate an existing ventilation system. All right. I love it. Voila. This, look at this. Isn't this a thing of beauty? Look at these tools that we offer you from Isaiah Industries. No one else does this. No one else. I feel like I want to channel my inner Trump right now. No one else can do this. All right. We put together a real sophisticated attic inspection kit. I talked about it's more than just a flashlight, right? Flashlights are important, but there's a lot more tools that you could be using to properly inspect an attic, right? And so write this down. I stole it from Seth. He mentioned it in part, but he didn't complete the whole sentence earlier. All right, he said something like this: we must have a process for uncovering problems and introducing solutions. That is gold. All right, let me say that. We must have a process for uncovering problems and introducing solutions. All right, a process is a series of actions and steps taken in order to achieve a particular end. I looked it up. What is a process? All right, that's the definition of a process. All right, it's a series of actions or steps in order to achieve a particular end. I would add the word disciplined, because if we have a disciplined process for uncovering problems and introducing solutions, that means there's going to be structure and guidelines to that process. It means you're not just going to be able to wing it, right? It means that this process is going to be repeatable, right, across your sales team. It means that anyone from Adonai to Schroer and Sons to 1818 to Golden Dragon or whatever company it is, everyone would be doing very similar steps because it's a disciplined process for uncovering problems and introducing solutions. And when you're able to do that, that's going to be key. So you're going to have tools and systems in order to do that. So when is this attic inspection supposed to be set up? We really believe it should be done during the appointment setting process. When that customer calls up for the first time and says, hello, I'd like to talk to someone about my roof, right? You're having that conversation, you're asking all the important questions, and then you're also able to help set up an attic inspection. Why do you want to do it then? Because big reason is most attic accesses are found in the upstairs living space that is usually not where guests are welcomed, right? Not usually where contractors are saying, oh, come on up and see my bedroom, right? See my closets, right? And that's where you're going to be going up into the attic, right? And if it was my house, my wife wouldn't let you up there because, she would never want you to see our laundry basket or something like that, right? So she'd want to tidy up things before anyone went upstairs. So you could say something like this. This is what we would say in our scripting. As part of our 5-star service, we offer a free, healthy attic inspection to ensure that your roof and attic ventilation system is functioning properly. It's a free service. It'll only take our roofing consultant, 10, 15 minutes to properly inspect the attic and the ventilation to make sure. And so can you make sure that he or she can gain access? Would you like to include that as part of our visit? It's an option. It's a free service, but it will give you a disciplined process for uncovering problems and introducing solutions. Let me give you 6 reasons why we think you should offer a healthy attic inspection. Write these down. First, it's going to set you up as the expert and set you apart from the competition. All right, that's one. Sets you up as the expert and it helps to differentiate you or separate you from the competition. Two, it helps you build value during your presentation. Why is that important? We often say that you have to build $100,000 worth of value in order to ask for 50. All right. So if you're not building value during your presentation by doing things that are different, by using tools like this, then how are you really differentiating yourself from anyone else the other 3 or 4 contractors who's already shown up? 3, it gives you ammunition to create a sense of urgency for the homeowner about their re-roofing decision. Why? They didn't know they had a problem. Most metal roofing customers tend to be meticulous and proactive, and they might be setting up an appointment and they think that their decision is 6 months, 12 months, 18 months away, right? But because you uncovered issues about wet insulation, because you saw streaking, that's the signs of organic growth, because you saw bathroom vents that were not connected, you saw a whole host of things that they didn't even know existed, you're already causing a sense of urgency inside that customer. Number 5, Seth said this, a thorough attic inspection protects your company. Remember, anything that is above the ceiling, they think you're responsible for. So if you do a thorough attic inspection, you're helping to protect your company. And 6, an attic inspection will give you the opportunity to get that homeowner involved in the process. And we'll talk about how we do that. But it's such a valuable 10 to 15 minutes that you can invest to help build value and separate yourself from the competition. All right, so let's look into this. All right, so obviously you're going to use a flashlight. Let me unmute yourself if you want. What are some things that you notice in these pictures to the right? What are some things that you're seeing? That was helpful. What else?
Mold.
Mold.
Mold and rust.
Yeah, rusty nails. That's going to be really common, are the rusty nails. What else do you see?
An exhaust vent going through the soffit.
That's it, right? Right, and not really connected anywhere. All right, there's some black streaking over here. So all of these things, and you've probably seen all these things, right? So that's when you're using a flashlight, you can point those things out. All right, 2, a temperature gun. You want to use a temperature gun. You first want to measure the temperature on the outside. All right, what is the temperature outside around around the eaves, right? And here, write this down. The inside the eave should only be 5 to 10 degrees hotter than it is outside around that eave. Okay? So if it's 80 degrees outside, around that eave on the inside of that soffit, you don't want it to be any more than 90 degrees. All right, and then you're going to use that temperature gun up by the ridge. And at the ridge, you don't want that to be any more than 10 to 15 degrees. So if it's 80 degrees outside, maybe as much as 90 degrees at the eaves inside, and then you really don't want it much more than 95 or so degrees at the ridge. If it's like 110 degrees, 120 degrees, you can communicate to that homeowner those temperatures. This is how you can call down, hey, Mr. Jones, put down on that worksheet 115 degrees at the ridge. He already knows, because you already told him these numbers, that there's a problem with ventilation. These rivers of air are not causing the warm, moist air to get out and escape. All right. The other tool that you want to use, so a temperature gun is a great tool to use, and it'll help save you a lot of problems and really uncover some issues. Moisture meter. Many people do not use this, right? It's also called a protimeter. Moisture meters are powerful Because what you want to do is you want to take that moisture meter, drive it down into the bottom of the insulation, and measure the moisture that's contained either in the wood or in the insulation. Here's a key point. 20% moisture will promote organic growth, i.e. mold. It's 20% is the threshold, all right? But here, let me give you something else that's even more powerful. Remember I said that you want dry insulation is better than wet insulation? 1% moisture will loses 2.5% R value of insulation. 1% of moisture in your insulation, you will lose 2.5% R value in your insulation. So what we typically say is if a homeowner has an R40, right, insulation, and they have 10% moisture in their insulation, right? Who can do the quick math? What is the R value of that insulation?
30.
Yeah, that's right, 30. Good job, whoever said that. It's an R30 because they have lost 25%. 10 times 2.5 is 25%. 25% of 40 is 10, and 40 minus 10 is 30. So if it's 15%, it drops it down to an R25. Or if it's a little bit better, if it's 8% moisture, it would be an R32. If it's 6% moisture, it's an R34, right? So you see it, it's just a simple formula. You can even put this on a little note card, right? And you could put down some standard ones, and you could say, hey, you're right now, your R something like this. That is creating urgency. You're giving them real information that they didn't know. You're giving them real information, and now you're creating a sense of urgency. They never knew that they had a problem. They just kind of knew that their utility bills were going up. Well, there's a reason for that. There's a reason why they have to turn their heat up a little bit more because more and more is escaping, all right? Remember this. I wrote this down. Assuming you don't find significant mold requiring remediation, fixing the ventilation will eventually dry out that attic. All right, will dry out the moisture. All right, so remember, if it's less, I think I read if it's less than 19%, good ventilation will dry out the insulation. But if it's 19% or higher, no amount of ventilation will dry out your insulation. All right, you will have to encourage them. Either you can sell them the job for blow in new insulation, or they can get that remediated. All right, and there's the formula there. All right, everyone's favorite tool, the smoke pen. Every time we do this at the dealer onboarding, everyone always wants us to light up the smoke pen, right? It's a fun tool to have. Few people use it. It's a fun tool to have. All right. So using a smoke pen we think it's the most effective way to test how the current ventilation is working. So what you do is there's a wick on the end of that. You just light that wick, you snuff it out, and it creates this puff of smoke. And then you use your flashlight and you see what's happening with that smoke. What you want to see is that smoke moving up to the ridge, right? That's proper ventilation, right? What you don't want to see is that smoke just being stagnant, is just hanging out kind of at eye level. It's not moving at all. And you can tell the homeowner, hey, Mr. Jones, I'm watching this smoke. It's stagnant right now. It looks like we have a ventilation problem. The worst thing you could have is that if actually, and I've heard that this happens, is that the smoke actually goes down, behind you down the hatch. That means it's reversed. That means that the ventilation is working in reverse. All right. So that's going to be a real issue. That's what you don't want to see. All right. So having a smoke pen, a simple tool, will really help you evaluate how well the ventilation is working. And the last one is this, a humidity pen. All right, this is really good. This is different than the moisture meter, right? This is tests the humidity in the air. So again, just like you did with the temperature gun, you want to say, okay, what's the humidity outside? All right, you want to see what's the humidity inside. Here's the level. You really don't want to have more than 35 to 45% humidity, right, in your living space or in your attic. I just had my HVAC guy over yesterday to tune up my furnace for the winter, and he reset my April air to 35%. Perfect. It was up a little bit higher, and he said, "Hey, you might get some water on your window, so why don't we turn it down?" Maybe it was at 40. So that 35 to 45% is that ideal humidity for living conditions. 60% humidity will encourage organic growth. That's the percent where it promotes organic growth in a dark space that doesn't have those rivers of air flowing through it, right? All right, so you want to keep that air moving, and especially if you're in an area. We don't have anyone in Louisiana on this call, and I love, Seth, if you want to chime in at some point about he covers Louisiana, and they live in a swamp, and I don't know how they deal with all the humidity down there. All right, but it's so important to keep that air moving, especially in dark places. All right. Here's something that's key. Write this down if you want. You need three conditions to promote organic growth, to promote mold. One, the relative humidity needs to be 60% or higher. Two, the temperature needs to be 40 degrees or higher. Three, biodegradable material must be present. When all of those three things are present, you have a real opportunity for mold in either the attic or in the basement. All right, so having ventilation, proper ventilation working is super, super important.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, I can chime in just for a second, Scott, on this humidity dynamic. So he was
Yep.
mentioning Louisiana, which is practically a swamp, and they have like 99% humidity year round. But even us here in Ohio, we know that in July we're over 90% humidity. It is damp, and so that's really where we need to take a holistic view as best we can and use these tools in conjunction with each other. So, ventilation, we're bringing outside air into the attic. So there's no way for us to make that outside air less humid. And so that's where we are using the humidity pen both outside and inside. So we have that reference point of, are we increasing the humidity dramatically, or are we maintaining a similar to the outside ambient humidity? Because if it's 60% outside, it's going to be at least 60% in the attic, 90% outside, at least 90% in the attic. And so that's where, okay, are we increasing that humidity any? If not, great. But obviously, 90% is getting us into that threshold where starts creating the environment for mold. So, like the smoke pen becomes all the more critical. Our performance under that test to make sure we're moving that air, that 90% humidity air, not giving it the opportunity to stagnate, to saturate the wood and the insulation and all those things, and start creating those type of problems. So as long as we're moving it, we can still avoid those type of issues. We're not letting it saturate the material in the attic. But then, if we take that humidity measure outside and then inside, and we see that we're significantly higher, inside, especially, we need to start looking at things like, do they have a humidifier on their HVAC like Scott? And if they do, then we know that ventilation's important because they're maintaining a higher humidity level. Or we need to start looking for some examples like these pictures over here on the right of, are there other dynamics inside the house that are dramatically increasing that humidity? Do they have a ton of house plants? Do they have, 6 dogs living in the house? Do they have We had one friend whose brother had a thing for fish tanks, and he had 35 fish tanks in his house. She told us that story around dinner, and the rest of our friends are normal non-roofers, and they thought, man, that's a lot of fish tanks. My head immediately went to, man, his attic is probably wrecked from the amount of extra humidity from those fish tanks. There's all sorts of other considerations there. The bottom right-hand corner, that's a damp crawl space. So, there's all sorts of variables. So we take the humidity outside, we take the humidity in the living space, and then we take the humidity in the attic. And if we're seeing a jump in any of those in the living space and or in the attic, we start digging further into what potential problems could be there in addition. And even if they're dynamics or problems that have nothing to do with the roof, and we can still sell them the roof, but we're still educating that homeowner, making them aware, helping them better understand their home, building a whole lot of value in doing business with us rather than somebody else. Okay. Oh, yeah. So that was the last tool there from the attic inspection. So I can take over sharing here. Just a quick recap there from the inspection portion. With the right tools, you can evaluate the current system and generate the data to specify a solution. That's another power of this is we're taking it from just qualitative, anecdotal of just what we see to we have tools with bells and whistles and numbers. We're taking this to a much more scientific level than any of your competitors are, and really just going, great lengths to establish your expertise, going behind poking our head in the attic to establish expertise and build value. We have plenty of companies that we've trained on the attic inspection that sell the occasional metal roof, which we're super grateful for. And then they use the attic inspection on every appointment to build a whole lot more margin into their asphalt sales as well. So we're happy for that. That gives them more margin to market more, hopefully market our products and, build a more successful business. And we love it. So, this is something that is incredibly powerful, builds that value, builds that margin for all of your sales. Scott, we did have some chat come through requesting a quick review of your 6 reasons for an attic inspection.
I'm typing up 3 and 4 into the chat, so it's available.
Okay, perfect. All right. This attic inspection, sort of in the flow of the conversation that we have on the appointment, another great value for it is it does get us inside the house. It's a great tool just to cross that threshold. So sort of in the flow here, we show up at the appointment. We have the opening warm up and survey. We do the exterior walk around and inspection. And then, especially if you set this stage well in your appointment setting process, it's very natural to then say, hey, we got a good look at half the roof here from the outside. We need to take a look at the other half and evaluate your ventilation from inside the attic. Can you show me where we can access that and continue this inspection? And when phrased that way, they're quickly taking you in the house and they want that value and process. And then once we're in the house, it's way easier to sit down and have a much better conversation. So much value here. But we go through then this attic inspection transition in the appointment. We learned a lot, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Where's a comfortable spot for us to sit down and review and evaluate our options? And so then we're transitioning to that presentation portion of the appointment. And as part of that presentation, we go a step further and try to go a step further than anybody else. And really, we've gotten an understanding of their current ventilation. Now let's take it that step further to really specify their ideal solution moving forward. Specifically, doing the math to evaluate or doing the math to determine what is their ventilation requirement per code. We're going to make sure that they're going to be set up for a healthy system moving forward, and we're going to look smarter than anybody else who's shown up at the house, being able to do some fourth grade level math and really tailor this for them. So another illustration we throw out during our sales training sometimes. People pay more for a custom-made suit rather than one off the rack, right? People pay more for a custom suit rather than one off the rack, and that's really what we're doing here. For your unique situation in house, this is exactly how much ventilation you need, and here's how we're going to accomplish that. So we're going to dig into what that code requirement is here, and then how to go about doing the math in a simple way to then communicate that information. So when we start digging into code, and we've touched on the insulation, especially here already, but really when we look at code, ventilation is 1/3 of sort of the ideal attic assembly that code requires. In addition to the ventilation requirement, it does also require insulation in the ceiling assembly. The IRC, International Residential Code, calls for anywhere between R30 to R49, depending of insulation in that ceiling. And that varies by climate zone, which we'll look at that map here in a second. So in that ceiling, we need R30 to R49. And then in the northern climate zones, it also calls for a vapor barrier behind the drywall in that ceiling assembly as well. So that's a polyethylene sheet, plastic sheet that's installed behind the drywall that doesn't allow as much water vapor from inside the living space from getting up into the attic. It's required in northern climates because we're more prone to condensation because of temperature swings up here. And then especially in humid northern climates where we have a high level of humidity and then those temperature swings day to night, night to day in some portions of the year, it requires this vapor barrier as well. So what we have seen just over our 45 years of trying to work is help homeowners across the country. You can sometimes get by with 2 out of these 3. You can never get by with just 1. And so good context for us that we're obviously with the roof install, we're focused on the ventilation because we're the ones installing the vents, at least for the exhaust. But as we're doing that attic inspection and evaluating the health of the home overall, we need to be looking for these things as well. Because if they got a vented attic and we ventilate that attic, but they have very much inadequate insulation, no amount of ventilation is going to overcome that, and they're still going to have the ice damming problems. And if we talk to them about ventilation and implied that we were going to solve those ice damming problems, we're going to get a call next February from an unhappy homeowner who still has ice dams. So we need to be thinking about this holistically overall, insulation and vapor barrier. When we get into some of these unique constructions here a little bit later, where we are limited by the construction of the house to sometimes only being able to get 2 rather than all 3, it becomes all the more important. So Caleb, we're going to look at the climate zone map here in a second. It's broad enough where your entire market area is only going to be in one climate zone. So you don't have to worry about, what county you are in versus another. It's pretty broad, but we'll look at that map here in a second. So that's insulation and vapor barrier. Then we get into what the ventilation requirement is. Here is the excerpt directly from code. You don't need me to read you this verbatim. We've distilled it down here to what all this is saying. That code requires a 1 to 150 square feet of ventilation per square foot of attic footprint is required unless you have a vapor barrier and the system is balanced between intake and exhaust. And if you have both of those things, that requirement is decreased to 1 to 300. So this ratio is a square footage of ventilation to square foot of attic footprint. So we're not taking the cubic measure of space inside the attic. We're just taking into account the footprint of the attic. So the square footprint of the attic. So in this 1 to 150 example, say you have a 1,500 square foot attic, divide that by 150, that means you need 10 square feet of ventilation. So that's the baseline requirement here, unless you have these couple of other conditions in place as well. Where number one, if you are in one of these northern climate zones, the house has a vapor barrier in the ceiling, and the system is balanced between intake and exhaust. If we have both of those things, then we can decrease that ventilation requirement to 1 to 300. So going back to that 1,500 square foot example, instead of it being 10 square feet of ventilation requirement, 1,500 square feet of attic divided by 300, that means we only need 5 square feet of ventilation rather than the 10. So as we're teaching this and using at our own retail operation in Kentucky and have seen with other contractor partners across the country, we are typically we are shooting for this 1 to 300 rather than the 1 to 150. So for a couple of reasons. Number one, in these northern climates, in most of the houses we're working in, we found it safe to assume, in most cases, that there is that vapor barrier in the ceiling. If the structure is old enough, like if the house is 100, 150 years old, where it wouldn't have a vapor barrier, there's usually other considerations that limit the amount of ventilation we can get in there anyway. So we've got to look at those uniquely regardless. So we're seeing it very common. My house was built in 1965. It's got a vapor barrier in my ceilings and in all my walls. So, it really, from that 50s, 60s and on, it became standard in these northern climates. And then secondly, we're going to talk about this more here in a second. We're always shooting for a balanced system. It's not an option to put in an unbalanced system that we would specify. So we're always meeting that requirement as well. Which if we've got both of those, we can then decrease this requirement to 1 to 300, which means if we're decreasing the requirement by half, that means we need half as many holes through the roof to get the ventilation we need. And, we always like that as well. And most homeowners, from just simply an aesthetic standpoint, like that dynamic too. So we're always shooting a 1 to 300. I've had some customers over the years that have wanted to go to that 1 to 150. And eventually I talked to them later and they've run enough appointments where they realize it's really hard to hit that 1 to 150 because of a variety of factors and, again, putting all those holes in the roof and so forth. So when we do the math here in a second, the example we're going to run through is using this 1 to 300. So again, if you have a 1,500 square foot attic footprint, divide that by 300 means you need 5 square feet then of ventilation. But real quick, I got ahead of myself a second. Caleb, here's that climate zone map that we talked about. Again, it requires a vapor barrier in climate zones 6, 7, and 8. So another dynamic here why we stick to 1 to 300 is the vast majority of the population of the country falls in these climate zones where a vapor barrier isn't even required. So we've got climate zone 6 and 7 here. Climate zone 8 is like the Arctic Circle of Alaska, so not much of a consideration either. So vast majority of the country is in an area where technically a vapor barrier is not required, though in our experience, we very much like it to still be there in most cases. But that second requirement, the system must be balanced. And again, we don't believe there's any consideration where you would put in an unbalanced system, like I said. If the system is unbalanced either direction, you're going to have problems. So if you've got more intake than exhaust, if it's unbalanced in that direction, more intake than exhaust. We've been in areas of Texas and Florida post hurricanes, have seen this in Iowa post their tornadoes and derechos a couple of years ago, where these extreme weather events and there's so much wind blowing, it's blowing so hard that there's so much additional wind blowing in through that intake with not enough exhaust to get it out, that literally the ceilings of the house explode down into the living space. You've got too much intake, that attic gets pressurized and it literally explodes. So that's not good. We don't want that. So that's means we don't want more intake than exhaust. The other way, if we have more exhaust than intake, those exhaust vents are going to pull air from somewhere. And if we don't feed them enough from an intake perspective, then it's going to either start pulling air in from another vent nearby. Ridge vent's going to start working crossways, and one side's going to bring in air from the other side. That depend which side is which depends on prominent wind direction. But if it's bringing air in crossways, that means in addition to that air it's bringing in, it's also going to be bringing in, snow and rain and whatever else elements, dirt, dust from outside as well. So that's not good. We've been in houses and done inspections where they put ridge vent on top of the house without adequate intake, and literally they pressurized the living space. There was so much suction, and that ridge vent was actually pulling in more air inside the living space, and it was pulling more air and moisture in through the walls of the house, and they were getting like mildew and mold growing behind their furniture that was up against the walls around the exterior walls. So anyway, lots of problems can happen either which way. And so if we are limited on the amount of ventilation due to soffit overhangs or some other factors, we rather than defaulting to we always default to this same balanced perspective rather than saying, well, at least I can get the exhaust requirement even if I can't get the intake. That's never the answer. We're always defaulting back down to whatever system we can specify that is balanced between both intake and exhaust. Otherwise, we're going to have issues there long term. Any questions on that? Any other examples you guys have seen? It's becoming way more prevalent. It's since over the last 20 years, really, where as ridge vents have gotten more popular. It was less common back when we only had off the ridge options because, again, every roofer assumes that you only want as few holes through the roof as possible. But when ridge vents became popular, it was sort of believed across the industry that ridge vent is the best. You always want a ridge vent. And so no matter what any other dynamic, every roofer as part of every roof was putting down ridge vent across the ridge, regardless of any of these other considerations. So we start hearing more and more of these stories of unbalanced systems and then the problems that arise from it. And it both goes the other way, using ridge vent where there's not at all enough ridge. And we're going to look at that example here in a second, where a lot of structures don't have enough ridge to meet requirement with a ridge vent, yet that's still what the product that is being used. So if we can, both for our own sake of not creating problems for ourselves down in the future, the homeowner's sake of having a healthy house, and then also position ourselves as an expert by really taking a unique look at their structure and then specifying this ideal solution, tailored specifically for them. To help do that, as part of that inspection form Scott had shown on a previous slide, we have this section to make this math as easy as possible. So we call this the ventilation calculator. There are apps that are out there that'll do this math for you as well. All the Lemanco, AirVent, the other ventilation manufacturers have these. I'll show you just a quick screen share of the one I like here in a second. But so there are apps that are available. I still like defaulting to using the pen or pencil because, again, I'm going to be the only salesperson that shows up and at least proves I have the brain cells to do this simple math. And that just keeps working in your favor. So, lay it out, and then you can easy to walk the homeowner through it as well, and show you're taking that extra care and attention. But so let's walk through some examples here of doing this for simple structures and see how we do that. So that first box there is the attic footprint. Again, where it's just the square footage of the footprint of the attic. On this 30 by 50 ranch, that attic footprint is 1,500. We divide that by 300. That's the 1 to 300 ratio. That means we need 5 square feet of ventilation. That's what code tells us we need. But we have to do some additional math because number one, the vents on the market, the NFA ratings, net free area, which is the measure of how much ventilation an individual vent will provide, is not square feet, it is measured in square inches. So if you look at the typical box vent, that's 50 NFA, that is 50 square inches of ventilation rather than, it's obviously not 50 square feet. So that's this next step here of taking, okay, code says I need 5 square feet of ventilation, but how do I equate that into this NFA number that allows me to really design this ventilation package? So we're going to multiply that 5 square feet by 144. Everyone know why we use 144? Because a square foot is 12 by 12 inches. 12 by 12 times 12 is 144. So that means 5 square feet of ventilation is 720 square inches of ventilation required. Or another way to phrase that is 720 NFA of ventilation is required. Again, NFA is net free area, and that's how we measure the different ventilation products that are out there. So we've equated it to how we can then evaluate the ventilation. The last step here is we need to balance the system. So that 5 square feet that code tells us we need, that's total ventilation. And so it's not 5 in, 5 out. That's the total amount. So it's actually 2.5 in, 2.5 out. And so that's dividing it by 2 here, 360. That's the NFA we need from an intake standpoint, and then also then the NFA we need for exhaust. Now that we've broken it down that way, this last step is using the ventilation products that you offer to then determine how many box vents, how many off the ridge vents, or how many lineal feet of ridge vent you need to install for that structure to meet the requirement. So a box vent is an individual unit rating. Ridge vent, their NFA rating is per lineal feet. So if we use 20 NFA per lineal feet using our high flow ridge vent here, that means we need 18 lineal feet of ridge, or of that ridge vent, in order to meet the ventilation requirement. So obviously in this 50-foot long ranch gable roof, we have plenty of ridge for that ridge vent. That's not going to be a problem. The problem comes though with most of your competitors saying, "Oh, even if they get to this point, they say, "Oh, I only need 18. I have 50." That's great, and they go ahead and install it all across the entire 50-foot run of the ridge here. Now, all of a sudden, we're very likely get into an unbalanced system because it's unlikely they have enough intake to match that 50 feet of ridge that they've put across the top. So 50 feet, that's all of a sudden you have 1,000 NFA. Yeah, 1,000 NFA that you all of a sudden need to account for in your soffits as well. When we go to install this and what we do, we need to be mindful of that also. So most of our customers who are using high flow in this case, they may use the product, the ridge vent all the way across here, just from an aesthetic standpoint. That way it looks consistent, but they'll only cut in through the decking, the middle 18 or 20 feet or whatever they determine that they can safely match with their intake. Again, it being mindful of these dynamics all the way through. Just because you meet the minimum, you don't go ahead and go above and beyond unless you're certain that you can match that with your intake as well. That makes sense? So we need 18. We have, in this example, we have plenty, but like I alluded to earlier, there's going to be structures where the numbers can be very similar, but all of a sudden it becomes way more tight on whether a ridge vent can actually accomplish this for us. So let's take this same 30 by 50 example and turn it into a hip roof. So does anybody know the trick for knowing the length of the ridge on a hipped roof, assuming that the pitches are equal on all sides? So it's length minus width. So for a hipped roof, if the pitch of the roof is equal on all sides, you subtract width from length, and you can then know that that ridge is 20 feet long. So in this case, the attic footprint didn't change. We're still looking at 50 by 30, meaning the ventilation requirement didn't change. All these numbers are still equal, but instead of 50 feet of ridge, we only have 20, and all of a sudden it got a whole lot tighter on whether a ridge vent would actually meet the requirement or not. And so in this case, it would, and you can still use it, but it's good to be mindful that as the closer the hipped roof gets to square, the less likely a ridge vent is going to be adequate. So if you just think through, if this was a 50 by 40 hipped roof, our NFA requirement has actually increased because the square footage is now 2,000, but our ridge has shrunk to 10 feet. So it's not at all going to be enough ridge to meet that requirement for that house. So we're going to have to default to some of these off the ridge options, whatever that is for your company, and do this math a little bit differently. But again, a lot of roofers, ridge vent's always better. And on that 50 by 40 example, they would slap a rolled ridge product across the top and move on, and put that house in a very precarious spot moving forward. Make sense? Any questions? Okay, so here's that screen share. This is the CertainTeed app, or screen recording. CertainTeed app showing their NFA calculator. So I like this one because it's the simplest out of all of them. It simply is this page here that allows you to plug in these numbers and spits out your NFA requirement. So if helpful, you can have that in your back pocket. But again, if you use the app, the computer is the perceived smart one in the conversation, rather than you being the smart one. So I think it's still worth it to do it by hand. And then it also allows you to sort of explain each of those steps to the homeowner as you go through. So now we're going to start. Scott's going to go over some of the generic numbers. So this context now of NFA requirement, we're going to take a look at the different type of vent products that are out there and what their typical NFA rating is.
All right. Seth, thanks for going over that fifth grade math. I spent the best 3 years of my life in fifth grade, so I'm always happy when you cover that section.
You're a great testimony for the New Jersey public school system. All right. Well, all right. Tim, go Jersey, right? Go Jersey. All right. All right. As Seth said, there's a couple typical examples. It's really important to know how much NFA you have in these soffits, right? And so how many feet of a vented soffit you're going to need to create what Seth continually reminded us is this balanced system. So you always want to have a balanced system. All right. So and soffits are going to have different NFA. So you have a one on the left-hand side, it has 5.9
NFA per square feet, and then you have the other one that has a little bit more. And so that will help you determine how much intake you're going to have. And be mindful of this also. And you guys probably know this, but just let me say it just for the sake of saying it. You're also going to have to consider the depth of the soffit. All right. So Seth and I were chatting the other day, and he has a little, I think he said he has a little bit narrower soffit. I have a more traditional one. I think it's 12 inches. So and when we're talking about, I've had customers in Baltimore who had 2 inches. They had nothing, right? And so you have to be mindful. And Seth's going to talk to us a little bit about challenging ventilation issues. So intake is always important to keep in mind. And then let's talk about exhaust. What's wrong with this picture? It's Halloween. I'll give you a virtual piece of candy for whoever says, what's wrong with this picture?
Competing systems.
What's that?
Competing roof system, ventilation systems.
Chris, man, $100,000 bar. You got it, buddy. All right. Yeah. So you got too much ventilation happening. And what Seth already reminded us of, they're going to compete against each other, right? And the strongest ventilation system wins. So this is a situation where sometimes in life you want to think more is better, not in ventilation, right? More is not going to be better in this situation, right? Balanced, as Seth said, balanced is best. So the strongest vent is going to be pulling in air from the closest source. So those whirlybirds might be sucking in air, from it's pushing out the air and it's sucking it in through the ridge vent, or you got the box vents down there. I'm not sure who's going to win, but the person I know is going to lose is the homeowner, because that's the one who's going to have to deal with all this snow and rain and dust getting sucked into the attic, and it's going to cause a real problem. So obviously this is an extreme case. I know none of you guys in my territory would do this. I'm not sure about Seth's territory, but I know me, because I get my people into ventilation seminars, and we're going to be tops. All right, so we're covering that. All right. Hopefully, and please, I would encourage you not to use those whirlybirds. It always reminds me of a pizza shop growing up in New Jersey. I use some other things. So here's a hard and fast rule: never mix types of exhaust vents on the same roof section. All right, that's a hard and fast rule. Don't do it. All right, so let's look at some exhaust vents. There's some different options that are fairly typical. Say a couple things about each one. So the box vents on the left-hand side, that typically has an NFA of around 55. Those are fine. You want to be these are off-ridge solutions, so those are good. They're a little bit limited. Obviously, the whirlybirds they have a higher NFA rating. But you have to be mindful that those spinning parts, they wear down on time. So we would encourage you probably to mount those on a curb, because eventually you might, especially if it's on a metal roof, you're probably going to have to replace it before you would ever have to replace the roof. So that's something to be mindful of with homeowners. What we've been promoting more about is this all the way on the right-hand side is called the Aura vent, A-U-R-A. It's an Aura vent. And you can see what the NFA is. It comes in a 12-inch and a 16-inch version. You can get these local big box store, Home Depot. These are non-mechanical. All right, so there's no electrical wires, there's no plugs, there's no moving parts. These create a mini cyclone, right, inside of the vent, because it's louvered 360 degrees all the way around, and it'll really help to suck out the air, that warm, moist air out of the space. So and these are actually these are usually the equivalent of maybe 2 to 3 of the box vents. All right, standard box vents. So it's a really nice option. Comes in multiple different colors. It's metal. So it'll last a whole lot longer for your customer. Something to consider when you're thinking through off-ridge options. When you're thinking about standard ridge vents, again, we can go through these. Rolled ridge vents are fairly common, obviously installed very quickly, and they work really nice when they're nice and fluffy and they're new. But when you put on those asphalt caps, presses it down, and over time, that NFA will likely get reduced. It will limit the amount of exhaust that attic space needs. So we think a better option is that heavier plastic in the middle. We typically would recommend the Cobra Snow Country. That has a NFA typically around an 80. However, in time, UV rays will degrade that plastic. And also, squirrels sharpen their teeth. We have pictures. We have pictures that shows not actually squirrels sharpening their teeth, but the results of squirrels sharpening their teeth. And they just chewed up those vents to heck. It'll happen in about 18, 20 years. You're likely going to have to replace that, as you guys know. So we think a better option is this, which Seth already mentioned, the high flow ridge vent that we manufacture. It's got an NFA of 20 and it's made out of aluminum, so it'll last forever and naturally non-corrosive. It's baffled as well, so there's not an opportunity for wind-driven rain to get in there. We think it's a really nice option, and we also have created versions that will work for asphalt roofs. Shameless plug for the high flow ridge vent system, but just a good reminder. You have off-ridge systems and you have on-ridge systems. Which is going to work best for your homeowner? All right. And then we talk about gable vents, and here's a situation when we would say, if this gable vent is working properly, maybe the architects or the workers were really on their game and they understood the wind direction and it's facing it away. My grandparents' home had gable vents, and they didn't have any fancy aura vents or high flow ridge vents. They just had gable vents. But the way that their house was positioned, that attic, it was like a man, there was a lot of air moving through that attic, right? And so we would say that if a gable vent is working, if it's working properly, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. All right. But you have to investigate that and make sure that there's enough air flowing through that. Um, and don't add, this is where you don't want to add like a ridge vent up here, an off ridge vent system, because what could happen is this gable vent could start to act as an intake and suck it out, and it's just sucking in warm, moist air. And then in the middle of the attic, if you will, the air's remaining stagnant. All right. So it's not a good situation. So you want to just keep in mind those types of things. You want to keep in mind too is if it's sometimes these get blocked off, which is fine if you install a different kind of vent system. So just keep in mind of those things. And then let's talk about real quick the power vents. All right. These power vents are obviously they're good. Power vents are going to be different though, because they're measured in cubic feet per minute and not with NFA. So you want to there's different calculations for that. Let me read you this. Codes specify that 70% of the attic's footprint, all right, as the CFM, the cubic feet per minute for most climates, are up to 100% in hot climates. So it's those different zones that we talked about earlier. It's going to require different amounts of circulation for those power vents. You know that power vents are not going to last forever. Eventually, these are going to get worn out. So you want to create a curb to mount these on. All right. Just like a skylight, you mount it on a curb because that skylight after 15, 20 years is going to have to be replaced. Same thing with a power vent. So we would recommend that you mount them on curbs so it's easier to replace. All right. And then obviously you don't want to mix these with other types of vent solutions. All right. Um, so the key takeaways that we would say for this are one, remember for the for your for your business, not only for the quiz, but for the business, one one square foot over 300. All right, for the NFA for the footprint is acceptable when you have a balanced system, when you have those when you're hitting at least two out of those three conditions. All right, when a vapor barrier and you're in that right zone. Two, one vent fits all approach. It's not going to work, right? You have to really think about, all right, what does the project really require? So just take a minute, you do your attic inspection, you think about what's going on, and then you provide the right solution, right? You provide their ideal solution for their unique home, right? So. What if proper ventilation is not possible? All right, and this happens, and especially in a lot of the older homes. I'll let Seth talk about that.
Yeah, so we go through all this work and do our very best, but we certainly run into situations where um, we can't get that 1 to 300 balance system between intake and exhaust. So I thought we would just walk through some of the most common most common of those situations here and sort of offer what our thoughts are. A principle to keep in mind, like Scott touched on a little bit ago, a lot of times we take a if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach to some of this. Where if they don't have overhangs and they've got gable vents that are working, we leave it be. But then there's sometimes, especially if we are talking about metal, where we have to think about things a little bit deeper with cathedral ceilings, but we'll get to that here in a second. So first sort of dynamic thinking through this is, what type of structures and houses where we don't have easy opportunity to create adequate intake. So whether that's a Cape Cod style house here that has little 4 foot or not 4 foot, 4 inch overhangs, that's not going to give us much room for the NFA we need. That's using my house as an example again. I've got 4 inch, 6 inch overhangs. So just simply don't have a great opportunity there. Or in some areas of the country, this is more popular than others, but the overhang, we have these open rafter tail style overhangs where there is no built out soffit with intake into the attic space, even if there is an attic space, but instead we have these open rafter tails, and then we're looking up more on the underside of the roof deck here. So in situations like this, they're on the market. Today, there are a number of options for alternative methods of intake there at the E-veg. Probably the most common here these days have been the plastic products that AirVent, I don't think Lemanco has them. AirVent and some of the others, Quarix have, where these really seem to become more popular when they saw that plastic as a ridge vent was working okay with asphalt, where then they developed these products for use down at the E-veg as well. So instead of going in from underneath the soffit, we instead have this vent that sits down on top of the roof deck and on top of a hole that we've cut in the roof deck itself to bring in air that direction to then funnel through the attic space. So there's also metal versions of those on the market as well. O'Hagan vents is a popular one out west, especially, and Aura, the company of those off the ridge vents Scott was talking about, they make a version of this. So there's others there too. So especially in snow and ice areas, my first concern with these type of products is if we if we're trying to go to these great of lengths to add ventilation, they've most likely had a problem with ventilation or problems related to inadequate ventilation. And in snow and ice areas, that's always often going to sort of manifest as ice damming down here at the eave edge. So we're going to try to solve this problem by cutting a giant hole underneath where those ice dams had been forming, in order to accommodate these type of intake vents, rooftop intake vents. So if we truly do solve the problem, that's not going to be a problem. If we add all these vents and it doesn't solve the problem, that's going to be an even bigger problem long term, where these ice dams are still forming, and now we've made it even easier for that pooled water to get down into the structure. So that's always my word of caution to begin with. Of we better be really sure that this is going to solve that ice damming issue. Um, and Shoot, had a thought there that I just lost. But anyway, I'm sorry. So we we got to be sure. Um, uh, so it makes me concerned there. It is interesting. We're going to be running into this more often in some areas of the country. We're starting to hear rumblings of in wildfire areas of code starting to outlaw soffit vents because they get concerned with wildfires reaching up to the walls of the house, the flames shooting up the walls and having an easy access into the attic. So they're specifying more and more these rooftop type of products. So we're definitely going to be running into them. We've had some customers use these with our metal shingle products as well, and it's been successful with it so far. On the metal shingle side, for those of you specifically working with us on that, I definitely like the metal options more than the plastic. So we've long used plastic ridge vent options with underneath our decorative ridge caps with metal shingles, and have had decent success there, knowing that even the best plastic ridge vent is probably going to be a maintenance item 25, 30 years down the road, and we're now sort of hitting that point where it is. Um, uh, Unfortunately, we don't like maintenance items. We try to avoid it. So, but there historically hasn't always been a great alternative. Doing that maintenance at the ridge is pretty simple. We just take the ridge caps off and we replace the plastic ridge vent and put the ridge caps back on. If all of a sudden we have a plastic option down at the eave edge that we're relying on and have started the metal shingles over top of that there, it becomes a way bigger project of replacing that in the future. Or it becomes a way bigger maintenance item when that fails, and instead of a couple of ridge caps coming off, instead you have a whole roof slope coming off because if the shingles blow up at the eave, then it could have a cascading effect up the roof. So definitely like the more plastic option, or excuse me, the metal options, which we would just flash around like a more traditional box vent and have it there down at the eave. There are vented drip edges, and we manufacture one that's very similar to this. This is an air vent product here, where instead of going in down through the top of the roof deck, you're either removing the fascia and reinstalling it, or you're just cutting the fascia back, where you're creating in between your rafter or truss tails, you're creating a 3/4 of an inch gap here at the top of the fascia where air can move in through this vented drip edge and then get into the attic that way. So again, we have a product similar to this, and there's others. This ends up being, uh, a significantly bigger project than some of these others because of that lumber work, having to remove the gutters, having to deal with the fascia, reinstall the gutters, etc. Do like it a little bit better because again, if it doesn't completely solve the ice dam issue, it's less likely that this would sort of create an even bigger problem, unlike these would. So there are options out there. Really, it comes back to taking a very intentional approach for what problems have they had so far getting to the attic, really looking at their construction to see what would best accommodate and make sure that we're really, oh, that's what I was going to say earlier. So if they've got it, it goes back to making sure that they have at least two out of the three or all three of those considerations for a total healthy assembly. Because if they have ice damming issues and you add all this ventilation thinking it's going to solve it, but the root of the ice dam problem is they have inadequate insulation, again, you're going to set yourself up to have an even bigger problem on down the road. And no amount of extra ventilation is going to solve that on its own. So we need to be taking a unique view of all of these. We do, especially the vented drip edge, we are specifying that in some cases. And we also do, in addition to the ridge vent and the vented drip edge, we have, a vented top wall. We have a vented shed ridge cap that can be used. So some other unique solutions there to design a system that's going to work for folks. Sometimes though, there's elements of the house that is just going to make that intake impossible to really accommodate. Those Cape Cod style houses that have shallow overhangs up in New England, a lot of those, even if we somehow brought in more air down here, you're going to run into a knee wall here inside the attic that's going to prevent air from truly moving all the way through and being able to get exhausted out up near the ridge. So again, getting in the attic and really making sure you understand the construction of that unique house. And if you do run into this type of situation, this is in this section here, probably trying to get as best you can with vapor barriers and insulation. And then depending on what's on the other side of this knee wall, if it's an attic space, you could use one of those rooftop vents to bring air in there and then exhaust it out the ridge. A lot of times in these houses, they've finished off that attic space, so we're only able to rely on insulation and a vapor barrier. So that may be the consideration there as well. But again, just taking a unique view of that structure. Then we obviously run into plenty of situations where there's no attic space at all. So cathedral ceilings, vaulted ceilings, where there's nowhere to really bring air in effectively. So obviously in those situations, we only can rely on vapor barrier and insulation to try to help. If they start having problems that if we identify problems that they've had up to this point, unfortunately, we're more limited in what our solutions can end up being. But a principle here that when we get into these houses, oftentimes it's not just taking a unique view of the house, it's taking a unique view of the problems that they have had up to this point. Because depending on what problem they have had, determines what possible solution is going to work best for them. Again, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So the most common issues with cathedral ceilings are either one, this top picture here, you start having there's evidence of condensation, or there in the bottom, obviously they've had issues with ice damming. But so the interesting thing here, I think we had someone unmute that had some background noise. But if we, depending on which of these problems, it's going to determine which solution they end up being. And really, the reason there's a different solution is because the problem is different. So with condensation, where cold is transferring down in through the attic, with ice damming, we're having an issue of heat from inside the house transferring out. And so that's going to change here what the solution ends up being. So before we move on from this, it's probably helpful to go back to the condensation conversation from earlier, that lemonade out on the deck with the water droplets forming on the outside of the glass. So remembering that condensation occurs when warm, moist air hits a cold surface. So warm, moist air from inside the house hits a cold surface, cools down, loses its energy, and then that water vapor turns back into liquid. And that's what we're starting to see evidence here of, like in this picture. We call this ghosting of the rafters, where you have mildew and grime building up sort of right over where those rafters are in the ceiling. So the reason, uh, so what's happening here is we're actually getting thermal bridging through those rafters. So the insulation is doing a decent job in between the rafters here at preventing that cold transfer. But because of the rafter, being a continuous tie between the outside from the inside, it's going to transfer more of that cold. It's called thermal bridging. So it's going to, where those rafters are going to be a colder spot on the inside of the ceiling that in this situation and many others is cold enough to start manifesting this sort of evidence of condensation, where that warm, moist air hits that colder spot, starts condensing and being a problem. So especially with this consideration here, when we have these type of conversations, we're always quick to um, warn that in some cases, a metal roof could be the straw that broke the camel's back in creating that type of condensation issue that wasn't present before. So this has not been huge issue over 45 years. We've literally had maybe 3 or 4 cases of this. But where a metal roof, we talk about the cool metal roof benefits all the time, where a metal roof doesn't, retain heat like an asphalt shingle does. It cools back down faster, so it doesn't conduct that heat into the house and helps homeowners save a bunch on their energy bills. But in these situations, sometimes the fact that that metal cools down faster means it's going to transfer more cold back through that ceiling assembly than what those asphalt shingles did. And you can sometimes end up having, like ghosting like this or other evidence of condensation on the inside of the ceiling where you didn't have it previously. So if you're dealing with a cathedral ceiling, vaulted ceiling, and you're going back with a metal roof, and really, we've only seen this really be the case with a standing seam metal roof, where the majority of that panel is resting directly on the roof deck, so it's going to conduct even more of that cold than what a metal shingle would. You want to be mindful of that. And we'll talk about our dry tech mesh here in a second, but we have some customers who are using that consistently as a safeguard against this. So we've got a cathedral ceiling. We first, if they have had issues, what issues have they had? Has it been condensation on the inside of the living space where we're getting that cold transfer, or has it been ice damming where we're getting heat transfer out? And depending on what exactly that is, it's going to then determine what our solution is. And also being mindful that if we're going back with a standing seam metal roof, we may need to think about this even a little bit further. So if they've had these type of issues, our really only option, unless you guys are set up with maybe spray foam or insulation and really wanting to dig in and re-insulate that existing ceiling, most roofing companies start looking at what they can do above the existing roof deck to help start prevent some of these problems. This is called, sort of as a generic term, above sheathing ventilation. So above sheathing, that's the original roof deck, and then ventilation, meaning we're creating a vented chamber. Sometimes, though, it's just a dead airspace. We're creating that chamber where we're able to move air and then putting a new layer of decking on top of that. So here in this top picture, you see how this contractor was doing it, where he put down sleeper 2x4s over the existing rafters on this roof. And then on top of those 2x4s, he's putting a new layer of decking, which the new roof will be installed over top. You run the 2x4s is probably overkill, or in most situations. Most oftentimes I'm seeing 1x2s. This was just the best picture that I could put together for this. But the principle of those sleepers over the existing rafters and then the new layer of decking on top. So you can see here how we've now created essentially new rafter bays that we could bring air in down here at the eave, move air through that bay, and then work on some method of exhausting it out. Obviously, with a hipped roof, that gets a little bit more complicated yet. But here we're going up to a ridge. It'd be pretty easy to put a ridge vent across the top and then have an opportunity for that air to be moving through and then exhaust away. Um, if they have existing overhangs, you're just cutting a hole down through the original decking into that soffit space to feed that air in. Sometimes you're having to do this though in one of those other situations where you don't have adequate soffits, so you're having to combine this with maybe a vented drip edge like we looked at earlier. So again, going back to this principle of what problem are we trying to solve? So if they have ice damming, this can be a great solution. Because with ice damming, we're having that issue of the heat transferring out, warming up the roof deck, uneven snow, melting of that snow, and creating those problems. But by having this new vented chamber, if we're able to move air through that, we're going to catch that heat that is transferring out and exhausting it out at the ridge before it has the chance to warm up this new layer of decking on top. So we're able to keep a consistent cool temperature over that new layer of decking and eliminate those ice dam problems. If they had the condensation issue, though, if we vented that airspace, we're really not going to be changing the condition as it was previously. So again, if they've had condensation, we're getting cold transfer down in through to the inside of the ceiling. If we spend all this money and time to build up this new system up top, and then we go and we vent these chambers, we're still bringing the outside air in over top of that original layer of decking. Pretty much the exact same condition that this was before, and unlikely to change it enough to eliminate those condensations they had inside the house. So in those cases, our recommendation typically would be just to leave that as a dead airspace. In that case, you could run your strapping, your sleepers horizontally or vertically, because you're not moving air through there, but you're just creating a dead airspace that's going to stop the conduction of that cold down through and into the ceiling. And so in that case, that would be a more ideal solution than venting that airspace itself. This obviously is very elaborate and costly. Sometimes it's the only good option. Sometimes the structure would benefit from it, but based upon other sort of geometries of the house, it's not an option. Think about if you've got a top wall from a second story window of the roof, and that the window frame is only 3/4 of an inch above that original decking. We can't build another 1.5 inches up on top of that roof to build this dead airspace there. We're going to start hitting those windows, or other issues with skylights or other things there. So there are when we have one product, and there's some others that do allow us to underneath standing seam create a dead airspace without dramatically increasing the height. And that's what you see here in the bottom picture is our DryTech entangled mesh, where we're lifting it up just enough to help stop that cold transfer. So that something like that could be a better option and a much cheaper option as well. There's some other benefits of sound attenuation, oil canning prevention, etc. So sometimes you have to think about a product more like that rather than either for cost or other considerations, some more elaborate solution like a cold roof. Any questions on that? Sometimes it's just above sheathing insulation. So again, if you're just trying to prevent cold transfer on down through, it can be a good option for condensation, to prevent condensation. If they're having significant ice dam issues, it's oftentimes tough to get enough insulation on top of the roof to really make a dent into that issue. So there's different versions of this product, different types of foam, both EPS and polyiso options are out there. Polyiso does offer a higher R value per inch than EPS. But you can see that even at 4, 5, 6 inches, we're not adding, we're adding some R value. We're not adding an incredible amount of R value. And so this is tough to make this the end all be all solution sometimes. But if it's again, especially on condensation, you can go a long ways in preventing it by adding a few inches here, assuming you don't have those other height considerations like we already talked about. Our typical recommendation is if you're going to use something like this, to use one of the products that have a nail base adhered already to the foam on top. Especially with metal roofing, we've seen some companies try to get by with just the foam itself, but then you have issues of with standing seam, inconsistent fastening that results in oil canning, compression of that foam over time if that roof is getting walked in any way. So we always like that nail base on top just to give a solid foundation for installing the roof back above rather than only having the foam itself. A different variation of this sort of above sheathing insulation is a type of construction to look out for. It's been used most frequently in sort of modular home construction, or especially like timber frame log cabin packages, where it's a structural panel, so it weight bearing as well as then the insulation and roof deck up top. But it's called a SIP panel, structurally insulated panel. It's sort of often referred to as a sandwich panel because it's got wood structure on the bottom, it's got the foam insulation in the middle, and then wood on the top as well. And it gets installed in big panels here, often used on the walls as well. So it sounds like a great idea, and if it's installed perfectly under perfect conditions, it can be a fine solution. The problem comes when you get outside of those perfect conditions, where when you install it, you tape up the seams. You're really trying to prevent moisture from at all getting inside that assembly. Because if it gets inside that assembly, it doesn't have a way outside that assembly, so it starts rotting the wood on both sides, starts breaking down the insulation, and being a problem. Especially with asphalt over top, it's been problematic because there's no ventilation, all that insulation there, high density insulation, it holds all the heat rather than dissipating it. And as it holds the heat, it cooks the asphalt shingles on top. So if you pull up on an appointment, and especially if it's a log home and you look up at the roof and there's these vertical lines of curling shingles every sort of 4 or 5 feet going across the roof, that's a telltale sign that you have SIP panels there and you need to start making considerations for it. So if it's unfortunately, if it does suffer from that moisture issues, there's really no other way to fix it other than take those off and either reinstall or traditionally frame over top. And unfortunately, a lot of people have had those type of issues there. And unfortunately, we've had situations over the years where we've had customers put down one of our products over top of one of these roofs without taking into consideration these problems, and then those moisture issues show up 5 years later, and then it's an even bigger problem for everybody involved. So again, something we like to pass along and be on the lookout for. More and more frequently, we're getting into questions and situations where homeowners are opting to do a hot attic or totally seal their attic with spray foam, especially in new construction. This is becoming more and more popular. So all of us are going to be running into it more frequently, 10 to 15 years from now, where instead of having a vented attic space, they instead use spray foam to seal up all sides, every nook and cranny of that attic with spray foam, and rely just on its R value to try to prevent these type of issues that can come with inadequate ventilation. Again, if done perfectly with closed cell foam, this can work. The closed cell foam is a vapor barrier. It's impermeable to moisture. So if when they seal up the floor of the attic, they're going to prevent any moisture from getting up into the attic and keep that moisture inside the living space itself. And then they're obviously doing the same, out into the soffits and then underside the roof deck, like you see here as well. Uh, but again, it becomes a problem if it's not done perfectly. If you have one void in that spray foam over the ceiling, moisture is going to get through that void and then get up into the attic space and not have anywhere to go. And regardless of how well you seal it up there, there's going to be some thermal bridging, some cool space that moisture can hit, condense, and then start creating a problem. Unfortunately, there's plenty of instances out there where homeowners have had their attics sealed with open cell foam. That's obviously even worse, where the open cell foam is not a vapor barrier, so moisture passes directly through it. Again, it becomes a problem even sooner, and a catastrophic problem. So, I had a homeowner in Ontario this last year that had our roof installed on top, had a contractor finish off his attic as living space, used open cell foam to try to finish that, allowed moisture to pass right through, and totally rotted out the roof deck from the underside underneath our roof system, and the homeowner had to, yeah, way big problem on his hand. So something to be on the lookout for. You end up in an attic where they've had that work done, or they've had spray foam done just on the ceiling and think that that solves all their problems. Anyway, there's a lot of variations there. Over the years, it has affected um, some roofing warranties for years and years. The asphalt shingle warranties had an exclusion for being installed over spray foamed attics. Those exclusions have largely gone away from the ones I've read here in recent years. Um, but they didn't change the product to somehow that now being a good application. They only responded to the market where this is way more prevalent than what it was before. So it's still that spray foam is going to act like how the SIP panels did, of holding a lot of heat inside that roof deck and cooking those asphalt shingles, dramatically decreasing their life there. So can be done, but you better be sure that it's done well. If you're part of a project where they're adding this to an existing structure, then you got to start thinking about air exchangers for the living space. Where if you have closed cell foam on the ceiling, you're now keeping that air, or you're keeping that warm, moist air all inside the living space, and so they're going to be living in a terrarium if you don't account for that. It's just going to be so humid. So it just sort of has a snowball effect of considerations if they start adding something like this. So for all those reasons, we are fans of insulation in the ceiling, a vapor barrier when needed, and adequate ventilation ends up being the simplest option when possible, but sometimes it's not. It, Getting into any of these, another sort of safeguard option is a breathable underlayment. This is a product we distribute. We're the North American distributor of it through our Roof AquaGuard brand. But a breathable underlayment, it's instead of using a traditional synthetic that is impermeable, it doesn't allow any water vapor to pass through. These breathable underlayments are sort of like Gore-Tex. When installed, they don't allow liquid water to pass through from the top, but they do allow water vapor, the gas form, to push out from the bottom. So when you've got limited ventilation and you know that you're going to have some moisture, into that ceiling or getting up into that attic space, this can be just a cheap additional safeguard of trying to, set that homeowner up for health and success as best we can to allow it at least to breathe somewhat out through the roof deck. So Vent 3, these is our product for that. these products are measured, the amount of water vapor they pass through is its perm rating, permeability. It's a specific test that measures how many, it has this scale of how many perms measuring that breathability. So Vent 3 has a perm rating of 82. GAF's breathable product has a perm rating of 16. So very little permeability there. This was a product though that was engineered and first sold in Europe, where their construction looks very differently, and they do breathe a lot out through the top of the roof structure. And so it truly is a breathable option that would be a nice addition for folks if they are dealing with any sort of these limiting factors, limiting their ability to get adequate ventilation. So key takeaways here. We conduct a thorough inspection to understand what, if any, existing problems must be solved. Again, if it isn't broke, oftentimes we're not going to try something to fix something that doesn't need fixed. So other than really that cathedral ceiling dynamic, if we are installing a standing seam metal roof over top, that's really the one time we start thinking a few steps on down the road where we could maybe create an issue that wasn't there previously. So I've got customers that have gotten bit by that a few times, and now they install our DryTech mesh every time that they have a cathedral ceiling they're going to put a standing seam on. So that's that mesh product we looked at that just lifts up the standing seam just enough to help stop that cold transfer on down through and not create a new issue for folks. From there, if they do have issues, we then, like we talked about, what issue are they having specifically? It's never a one-size-fits-all approach, and we need to consider what the best option is going to be. If you ever get into that situation and you've got a job where it would be helpful to get our insight on it, or bring in Todd Miller or other folks from our technical team, always happy to do that as well, and just be a resource if that would be valuable. Be mindful to not create problems that did not exist previously. And products like DryTech, that mesh, or Vent 3 are relatively inexpensive safeguards for these type of situations. Any questions or thoughts on situations we didn't touch on there? All right, Scott, I'll leave it back to you to wrap us up.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to, I don't know if you want to just forward that slide. Yeah. So at the end of your workbook is a quiz. You can just take that, and it's fairly straightforward. And we will grade that for you. You just send it in to me to my email, scan it, take a picture of it, whatever, and just shoot it over to me. I'll grade it, then return it, and then hopefully with your certificate as well. And you can print that up and proudly display that in your office space. Show it to your wife or your whoever, your best friend, and tell them how smart you are. And next time you're on a deck in the summer, you can explain to your friends how condensation works. That's my contact information there. I'm always available. Really appreciate you guys and all you do. We love partnering with companies like you. You're the reason why we're in business. So if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll make sure I'll stay in touch with you guys as well.
Awesome. I think, Johnny,
Good.
did you have a question here? Yeah.
I did. Yeah, I was curious where we get your little toolkits that we went over earlier. The bag that we looked at, it's pretty sweet, and I'd rather not have to search high and low for all of those individually.
Well, yeah. Thanks, Johnny. What we can do is have Dave. I think Dave's still on. Dave and Lee we can talk about that, because we sell that at cost. It's not like Halloween candy, and so we are actually having to charge for that. But it's relatively inexpensive for the amount of value we believe it creates for any kind of roof. It's not just for metal roofing, right? It's for anytime you're going into a home. We believe Every company should be doing a proper attic inspection using tools similar to this. So, and the golden ticket is this: we have a script. We have a script that goes with it, and it all comes together as a package.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
great. We'll be in touch.
Awesome.
Well, thanks all. Enjoyed the time together here this morning. Appreciate you greatly, like Scott said. And we always like to say we're not successful unless you're successful. So anything we can all do to help to that end, we're ready. So just let us know. And hope you guys have a great Halloween and weekend.
Thanks.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.